This is Jesse here with JLSComics. I am going to do a contest entry for Mr. StrictlyComix. Congratulations on your milestones. Very awesome, very cool channel as well. So go check that out. For his contest, or go check his channel out, I should say. For his contest, he actually asked for two things. One was to answer this question: why has Batman become more popular than Superman? And the other question he asked was, what is your prediction for opening weekend for the Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice movie? Okay, I'm going to give you a couple other predictions, and I'm going to save my opening weekend prediction for the end, okay? So I think worldwide, it's going to do 1.5 billion. It'll do 550 million domestically, okay? And then I'm going to say my opening weekend prediction for the end, which is ultimately what he had asked for. So, so there's that coming up. Reviews on the movie are so far, there's been a couple, and they are very, very well reviewed. The movie that they said it was phenomenal, so I have high hopes for it, and I think that that's going to encourage additional people to go where they may not have. They kind of may have been sort of fence sitters, but now they're like, yeah, okay, starting to read this stuff. It sounds cool. Now we know it's cool based on these reviews. So, so there you go. So now the question at hand was, why has Batman become more popular than Superman? Now, to answer that, it purports that at a specific time, Superman was actually more popular than Batman. So I think what we need to do to get to the answer to this is travel back in time, all the way back to the 1930s. Superman actually first appeared in 1938. He was created by Siegel and Schuster. Actually, it was 1938 when Siegel and Schuster sold the rights to the character to Detective Comics Incorporated, DC. And they actually sold it for $130, right? But in 1933, pre-DC, there was a fan magazine, let's call it, that had this Superman character in it. So 1938 is technically considered the sort of the first appearance, I guess, the first time we've seen Superman. So this was 1938. During this time, there were these people, there was a lot going on in the world. The Nazi Party were rattling their proverbial sabers and threatening to invade Austria. You know, there was a lot of fear of foreign invasion. Orson Welles actually played off of that. In 1938, he actually had his broadcast War of the Worlds, where the aliens invaded. It was a radio play, but people were so on edge and afraid that it actually created riots, and people were like leaving cities in droves. You had Stalin in Russia. This is like in the middle of the Great Purge, it was called. You know, so there was a lot going on in the world, a lot of you know, fear of foreign invasion, but people also kind of, this was sort of a validation of people's notions. They had a very strong notion of what was right, what was wrong. Morals were very certain. They were very black and white. You know, and then a year later, a year after this character was created, World War II began. It was also the year that Bob Kane introduced Batman in the cartoon there in 1940. You know, also Leon Trotsky was massacred in Mexico. Hitler continued invasions. And a Superman radio show actually debuted. So 2 years after he kind of was, you know, rolled out to the public. Superman, kind of like, as I was just saying, sort of played on people's fears. It was on a global scale. This character of Superman, this strong, you know, perfect sort of specimen, if you will. He had a strong sense of justice and morality, a sense of right and wrong, that people really kind of, you know, sort of, kind of were drawn towards, because that's how they felt. You know, there were so many things wrong going on in the world, and you know, their sense of that being wrong was just very sort of defined, and it kind of brought to the forefront of their minds that as I said, the foreign invasion that was happening, needless deaths, you know, that were just rampant around the world. Because of this, Superman became immensely popular, and he actually helped usher in a new era in the comic book genre, okay? Then we have Batman. He was created basically a year later, right, 1939. He first appeared, it was May of 1939, and it was Detective Comics number 27. We have this billionaire, he's a playboy, a philanthropist, but he goes out at night with a mask, and he goes and fights at street level, the gangsters, everything. You know, this was kind of like, you know, we were out of the roaring 20s, you know, everybody, the stock market was huge, and then 1929, it crashes. The U.S. was like put into depression during the 1930s, the Great Depression it was called. It was just a time when people, with their senses of right and wrong, wanted to do right by their families. Suddenly they had this character that they could fantasize about, this billionaire playboy philanthropist who could go fight crime. How cool is that? But at the time, Superman, having been out a year, he's playing on people's, you know, their beliefs, more on a global scale. It was more of a widespread thing. But people wanted to just read about something and escape from all these harsh realities, you know, whether it was in their backyard, their impoverished backyard, or, you know, picking up that paper and hearing about another bombing or another explosion. They drew upon, you know, what was essentially pop culture, contemporary pop culture, and jazz music, kind of like build this character and kind of like make it somebody that they could in some ways relate to, right? We're talking about Batman here. And that's very, like I said, something similar that Simon and Schuster did, you know, that Bob and Bill Finger did with their two characters. But Superman was more on a more global scale and really kind of helped people validate what their definition of right and wrong was. So because of that, at the time, Superman was more popular. Then as the decades go on, we saw World War II, we saw the atom bomb go off, the Cold War, and with that, the promise of, you know, mutually assured destruction. You know, if I blow up your country with all these nukes, then I can absolutely do the same to you, so don't try it. We had the Vietnam War, Kennedy assassination, Pol Pot, you know, doing his atrocious acts. There were all these other political brush fires all over the world, in the U.S., you know, with Richard Nixon, for example. And people became, society as a whole became sort of bitter, disenfranchised. You know, their sense of what was right, what was wrong, you know, where their leaders were trying to take them, that was all turned to gray areas. It was gone, you know. It became, the right and wrong sort of became relative to what was happening. It wasn't like, this is absolutely wrong, this is absolutely right. So, you know, and because of that, you know, the pillars of, you know, justice and morality, they were weakened, crumbling at the time. But because of that, you know, because of that sort of, that paradigm shift in societal values, Superman became less and less relatable. He became more that, you know, sort of golden figure of the golden age, an era past, and, you know, Batman's popularity started to rise. He became that guy who could sort of, you know, fight in the dark. You know, he could do the dirty things. You know, he could beat people up, and, you know, it was something that, you know, there was an anger and a frustration underlying there that, you know, something had been done horribly wrong to Batman, and he was able to fight for people and you know, fight and push himself, and he was more dark, he was more brooding, you know, so he kind of took Superman's place as that more relatable character. You know, he was someone that was smart, someone willing to, you know, to push physically and mentally, you know, to protect us. And, you know, Superman, you know, he's very powerful. He doesn't necessarily have to push himself, right? However, they did try to sort of make this character of Superman more relatable and kind of bring him to not to match Batman, but to bring him to that point where he could sort of more fit societal values of the time. And now we're getting into like the 70s and 80s here, after we've gone through all these wars and battles. But, you know, in the 80s, let's talk about the 80s. John Byrne, he wrote the story about Superman killing Zod and Zod's cohorts. 1986, we had Alan Moore, actually, Action Comics 583. He killed Mxyzptlk. Superman, we're getting into the 90s now, is number 79. And this is something that I think we may see here in the very near future. One of the most famous Superman kills. He killed Doomsday. He had to. It was like the only way to stop this guy. It was either kill this person or he's gonna kill everybody, basically, right? So that was his way to stop him. But it just wasn't enough, really, to kind of change Superman to match where popular culture was and their interest. They were heavily involved in Batman at the time. Batman in the movies, in the radio serials, was very sort of campy. But the Batman in the stories was that dark and brooding character. Superman was more on the lighter side of things. The other thing I wanted to mention is, in terms of Superman versus Batman, Superman is too powerful. He's this like godlike character from another planet. Just has to be basically nerfed, which is a gaming term if you don't know what that means. He has to hold back basically when he fights. He could freaking kill anybody he wants. He can do anything he wants basically. He's Superman. He's become over time more and more powerful. The best stories, the ones that I guess I can relate to, so maybe I'm speaking from myself and I'm using the word relate there very loosely because, you know, it's Superman. It's hard to kind of relate to this alien that's come down and works for a newspaper and kind of kills people, not kills people, but fights these, like, you know, things on a global scale. It's not really what I do from day to day. But it's when Superman is sort of deconstructed. And he has to, you know, suddenly he's more that Clark Kent character than that Superman character. He's more human, and that's where I was going with that. You know, at that point, then he has to push himself and utilize his smarts and not just punch his way to victory like he normally could very easily. So conversely, you know, it's never been that way with Batman. He's always had to push himself, you know. He's always had to invent something, you know, push his mind to invent something, or, you know, discover something with his, you know, superior detective skills, or, you know, outsmart a villain, or, you know, help utilize someone to help him win. He has to push himself. And he's never been that overpowered character. So because he has a lot more to lose in that regard too. And he's giving more of himself to that fight for us to win, to beat those villains. So Superman, you know, they're not on the same playing field, but Batman does keep things for himself because he's aware of how powerful Superman is. He does keep things. He has those kryptonite bullets. They do say he has a ring in one of his pouch pockets that has kryptonite. He's got all these sort of fail-safes in place because he is that smart character, you know. And his morals are, you know, they're very strong. He's very, very sure of what his beliefs are, you know, trying not to kill. But because of that, because of such a sense of justice and for right, he does like to fight for us, so to speak, you know, the common citizen. Superman, one thing that I find about him, and tell me if you feel this way too, his vow to not kill, and I gave you a few examples of when he has, it's sort of a pseudo value, I guess, because he has broken it so many times, whether it was a monster or something, he has killed. And he fights with all these people all around him, like Wonder Woman, for example, who do kill. So it's like, you know, I'm not going to kill, but I'm perfectly okay with you right next to me killing somebody. So I think maybe people see through that a little bit. So now let's talk a bit more. That was a lot of subjectivity, right? So let's talk about something to quantify this. And the best way to do that, since ultimately what I'm going to lead to is my opening weekend prediction, let's talk about some sales figures for the movies, okay, worldwide box office, okay. So we had, before the first Batman in 1989, that amazing Burton movie, we had, what was it, 4 Superman movies. There was one in 1978. That was, for worldwide box office, brought in 300,000. 1981, there was another movie that brought in 101,000. 1983 was the third part of that, 4-part thing there. That brought in about, and I'm using rounded numbers, these are not exact, 59,000. Okay, in 1987 was Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, right? And that was 11,000, okay? All that together is roughly $471,000, okay? It wouldn't be another Superman movie until 2006. So from 1987 until granted we had stuff on TV, but 87 to 2006. And then another 7-year gap until 2013, okay? So I said $471,000 the first 4 Superman movies brought in, and that took 10 years. Then we had the Batman movie from 1989, and that brought out finally that dark and brooding Batman that I mentioned that was in the books. That brought in $409,000 on its own. That's only a $62,000 difference from what all 4 Superman movies at the time brought in over 10 years. Okay, and then we had we had Lois and Clark and stuff on TV, and then what was it? Oh, that was in later on. Then we had Batman Returns. That was in '92, right? That brought in about 266,000. Batman Forever was 1995. That brought in about 336,000. Then we had Batman and Robin, 1997. That one came out. That was 238,000. So you can see right there, those movies brought in hundreds of thousands. Granted, I don't recall what the budgets were on these. However, they were bringing in some serious money at the time. This was the 90s, and Batman essentially relegated, and using that loosely because there's a lot of great stuff on TV, but he went to TV, right? And then we didn't have anything for a while. We had Smallville and things like that, but it wasn't until 2005 when we finally got Batman Begins, and that brought in $359,000, and that was on a $150,000 budget, okay? And then 2006, and I mentioned this, we had Superman Returns, and that brought in $374,000 on a $232,000 budget, okay? And then we had the Nolan sequels. We had one in 2008, and we had one in 2012. Those sequels brought in over, over $1 million each. Each movie brought in over $1 million. Man of Steel, 2013, a year after the final Nolan movie, Man of Steel, that brought in $667,000, and that was on a $225,000 budget. It was a huge budget. But you can see there have been, the Batman movies have brought in not only so many more movies, but they brought in so much more money too. You know, growing up, I grew up in the 80s, okay? I had seen some of the Superman movies, and they're a little, I mean, I guess at the time, you know, the CGI and stuff, but they're a little light, I guess you could say. And then we had this dark, brooding Batman, you know, so cool in 1989, and the Joker, and, you know, it was just a really cool movie. And then you get the sequel with the Penguin and stuff, and then from there, it just been this really cool, badass character that we get to see in pop culture, in the movies, and so many more times than Superman as well. That not only goes for my generation, but the current generation as well. You know, Luke from the Luke and Dad Show actually brought that point up. You know, growing up in his generation, there's just been so much more in terms of movies for Batman than there has Superman. So their exposure, and my exposure for my generation as well, when we talk strictly the movies, has been so much greater than what we've gotten about Superman. So not only is Superman matching that change, that shift, that that paradigm shift in culture and society and values, he aligns with that, but our exposure to him has been so much greater recently than Superman. So because of that whole time frame, I believe that Batman has indeed become more popular than Superman. And it took decades, I guess. Well, maybe not necessarily decades, but it took a while, but it's firmly implanted in our minds now. So I hope that answers your question. And then getting back to the prediction piece, okay? So my prediction was worldwide. To be considered a success, they needed to do $1.2 billion. My prediction is that it will ultimately do $1.5 billion worldwide. Again, predictions, we're talking about more than just one weekend here. So I think it's going to do that. I think it honestly it has to for the success of the other DC Warner Brothers movies. It really has to, because it's going to set the tone for their whole shared universe that we have with Marvel, or the Godiverse with Netflix, or this or that. It has to. I think it'll do 550 domestically, but for opening weekend, and I'll tell you how I arrived at this number. I was kind of chewing on my words there. My prediction is $210,000. Okay. I think reviews are coming in. They're very promising. There's a lot of people anticipating this movie. You've seen some of the figures on some of these other movies what they've brought in. This is a golden age of superheroes and cinematic universes. This is just all over pop culture. It's all over the commercials. We got the Super Bowl commercials. We got, it's everywhere. There's a lot of people who want to do this. And yes, I said Batman is more popular than Superman, but both characters are immensely unpopular. I think that maybe for previous generations, maybe that did grow up in that late 30s, early 40s time frame, maybe they still do hold on to Superman as their sort of golden boy. So there are plenty of people who love and adore Superman. I find the character fascinating myself. There's a lot, psychologically that we could go into, perhaps, maybe like even survivor's guilt and stuff that we could dive into, but that's for another video. So my point is that there is a ton of interest and popularity and people looking forward to this movie. So I think that it will do a good solid 210. I'm gonna go 210,500. Okay, so 210.5 opening weekend. I would have gone a little bit higher than that, to be honest with you, but we have Good Friday and we have Easter, and I think that's going to affect sales a little bit. In terms of overall, once we get past that, I think that it'll hit those other markers that I said, or around there. But I think that is a good realistic figure for this opening weekend. 210.5, let's say. So 210,500,000. So there you go. Again, Strictly Comics, really fantastic channel. Go check it out. Thanks for doing this, this contest. I'm happy to support pretty much, this whole community. If you're doing a contest, I love doing these contests. Prizes are awesome. I actually have a contest myself coming up. I was supposed to go to, comic book fanatics comic talk last night, but I was actually very sick. I have some things going on. I still am. I'm just trying to give the best I can right now for the video. But I was gonna announce my contest there, but I didn't get a chance to, is my point. So I'm gonna be doing that very shortly. I am intending to see some of the folks on the Four Horsemen, I guess, or Four Guys in a Comic channel. Mark with a Mouth, What's Up Man, and Undisputed Frost. I intend to, chat with you guys. So maybe there I'll announce the video. So stay tuned for that. If you're watching this, I'm going to announce it there. So go watch that. But that's all I got for you. Like, comment, subscribe, share for Strictly Comics. and for JLSComics. Talk to you guys soon.